Thank you very much, Mike. Good morning. I am truly amazed by the number of people here. I estimated my son, who lives in LA, and Bill Damon and Ann Colby, who are my good friends, as well as Mike, to introduce me, but you've surprised me. So I appreciate you being here. So imagine if you asked the average American parent if their young person, their child, is doing well. And I've actually done that. As you'll hear in a little bit, I did a study with parents from all over the United States. If you ask the average parent, is their child doing well? The typical American parent would say yes. If you then say, well, how do you know? What do you look at? What are the indicators of them doing well? Other than for school grades across this country, the typical parent will say, well, they're not smoking, they're not drinking, they're not engaged in unsafe sex, they're not bullying. Most adults in this country define good by the absence of bad. This is a very dispiriting message to send out. For those of you who are academics, I'm sure you know that every year you have to have an annual review. You go into your department chair, and the department chair says, well, let's see your record this year. Well, you didn't turn off your students. They did show up to class. You managed not to insult the Dean of Arts and Sciences. And, you didn't outrage the Board of Trustees by your behavior. What a great year you've had. That's the sort of message we send our young people. But over the past 20 years or so, there's been a rapid increase in a new vision of youth development, one that's based on youth strengths and that provides a different frame to think about young people, that points to the attributes of young people that indicate they're thriving or flourishing, things that we want to promote, not just things we want to prevent. And that's what I want to talk to you today, the positive youth development perspective. So first I'm going to say what positive development is, what are the key ideas, and critically, why is it important to study the links between positive youth development, the ecology of human development, and young people's contributions to self, family, community, and ultimately civil society. Then I'll talk about what different theory-predicated research tells us about these links. And finally, I'll end up talking about what the implications are for research, policy, and practice. Now, just to bring colors to Newcastle, this is a sophisticated group. I want to briefly tell you why this approach is different, why the positive youth development approach is different than the traditional approach. I'm in Tufts, which is in Medford, that's how they say it, Medford, Massachusetts. Most people say Medford, but. And about 35 miles west of Medford is a town called Worcester. And that's where Clark University was founded by G. Stanley Hall in the late 19th century. And G. Stanley Hall was an amazing person. He was William James PhD. He was the first American PhD in psychology. He didn't want to be chair of a department. He wanted to be president of his own university, so he convinced Jonas Clark, a button manufacturer, to start Clark University. Has anybody ever been to Clark University? Okay, you know Clark Hall, the big hall there. Do you notice it looks like a button factory? Well, it does look like, because Jonas Clark hedged his bets. He said, if the university doesn't work, I'll be able to take this building and make a factory out of it. But Hall was an amazing academic entrepreneur. He founded the American Psychological Association. He invented the questionnaire. It was up to Rensis Licker to come and attach other tools for it. And he wrote several books, but in 1904 he published the first book on adolescence. And in that, he used a version of Darwinian thinking, a recapitulationist idea developed by the German embryologist Ernst Haeckel to argue that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny and that adolescence refers to that period in the lifespan when humans move from beast-like behavior of their ancestral past to civilized behavior. And so adolescence was biologically constrained to be a period of necessary, inevitable, and universal storm and stress. And for most of the 20th century, Hall's ideas were the predominant frame. But research, beginning in 1960 with a paper by Albert Bandura, research began to contradict the universal storm and stress notion. First of all, adolescence is not the only period in lifespan in which there are problems. All periods of life have problems. Babies have problems. Adults have problems. I'm the age that I'm taking care of my 94-year-old mother. Believe me, that is no easy age period to get through, or to stay in at least. She's not trying to get through it, actually. She's trying to stay in it. So the adolescent doesn't necessarily have a stormy and stressful period. And when you look at the actual research in adolescence, you see that, in fact, most adolescents don't have a stormy period. And although adolescents spend increasingly more time with peers than with parents, and if you ask adolescents who would they rather be with, peers, parents, or stay by themselves, they'd rather stay by themselves than hang out with their parents. When adolescents choose friends, they choose friends on the basis of value similarity to their parents. Not values like how you wear your hair or what music you listen to, but the value of education, the role of faith or religion or spirituality, the importance of family. So this idea that adolescents are breaking away from their family is just incorrect. Nevertheless, throughout most of the 1990s, we had these pillars of deficit reduction, these alleged biological deficits to reduce the very legitimate problems of adolescence that do exist. That was the predominant frame, and millions of dollars were, and to some extent continued to be spent on reducing these problems because of their alleged inevitability. But in the 1990s, at the same time that the heyday of the deficit model was being pursued, a new vision of young people began to emerge. And it emerged in two ways. First, from biology, with the work on neuroplasticity and epigenetics, pointed to the great plasticity in human behavior. Plasticity at the genetic level, plasticity at the neuronal level. And when you have plasticity, that means that there is a potential for systematic change. And work in developmental science showed that even seemingly intractable behaviors could be modified by community-wide interventions. Practitioners picked up on these themes before academics did, and they formulated the positive youth development perspective. So let me give you a very brief history of this perspective. Rick Little, who is an incredible social entrepreneur, if any of you know this series, Chicken Soup for the Soul, in the very first volume, there's a story about Rick Little, who at age 19 went to the Kellogg Foundation and started an organization, Quest International, which was to teach social skills as opposed to just reading, writing, and arithmetic. He then founded the International Youth Foundation, and in the late 1980s and beginning of 1990s, Rick introduced the concept of positive youth development as we currently understand it. And he defined positive youth development as involving 4 C's: competence, not just academic competence, but social competence, vocational competence. 60% of all adolescents who go to school full-time during the high school years work part-time, so the vocational realm is part of adolescent development. Health competence, eating, sleeping, exercising correctly. Confidence, a sense of self that I'm a young person who has the skill sets to accomplish valuable tasks for self and other people. Connection, positive relations with family members, teachers, coaches, mentors, faith leaders. And character, a moral compass, a sense of right or wrong, a sense of integrity. And these were Rick's 4 C's, developed just through conversations with practitioners and occasionally an academic. And he saw these as superordinate organizing concepts. In 1995, the late Peter Benson organized a meeting in Aspen to discuss positive youth development. And at that meeting, I was at that meeting, we invented a 5th, since this was all open, no data, let's invent a 5th C. And we developed the C of caring or compassion. And this was a sense of social justice, a theme that I'll come back to more and more. That just because you had what you needed in your life, your concerns shouldn't stop there. If you were a competent, confident, connected young person with good character, you would care about the world you're in. And you would try to level the playing field for other people. And Rick said, at an SRA meeting in Boston in 1996, okay, Society for Research and Adolescence meeting, I will accept your friendly amendment, but I have another idea, that if those 5 C's develop at a high level, a 6th C should emerge in exemplary young people. They should be driven, motivated, impassioned to contribute to self, keeping oneself healthy and fit, contributing to their family, without having to be bribed or cajoled, contributing to their school, and ultimately contributing to civil society and the institutions of democracy. All great ideas, no data. By 1999, Steve Hamilton, who's a professor at Cornell, noted that the positive youth development perspective was organized in 3 ways: as a developmental process, and that'll be the focus of most of my talk today. I'll come back next time and talk about the other 2 approaches. As a philosophy for how you design youth development programs, and I'll say a little bit about that at the end of my talk. And then as particular instances of youth development programs. What makes a youth development program, and how can you instantiate it in a community? So what are these approaches to PYD as a developmental process? Over the past 15 or so years, one superordinate theoretical frame has shaped several different theoretical models of the positive youth development process. So what's the focus of developmental science? Developmental science is a field that seeks to describe, to explain, and to optimize changes within a person across a lifespan and the differences between people and how they change across the lifespan. And today, Mike referred to the Handbook of Child Development, his chapter in that publication was one of the key ones that helped forge the idea that I'm going to present now. Today, all of developmental science looks at one particular meta approach to theory as the cutting edge approach. And this was named by a professor at Temple University, Bill Overton, Relational Developmental Systems Models. I'll explain that in a minute. All the theories of positive youth development in one way or another derive from this theoretical frame. So what is this theoretical frame? It's a non-reductionistic, strength-based approach. It says that genes don't float in nothingness and just provide a blueprint. The environment doesn't act on a passive organism. Rather, all levels of organization, from biology and physiology through culture, the physical ecology, and most importantly, history, temporality, the arrow of time, are all interrelated. So one level is both a product and a producer of the other level. There's these bidirectional relations, these mutually influential relations. And so as a consequence, integrated actions the action of the individual on the context, if you will, or at one level on the other, but we'll use the individual here. Individual on context and context on individual provides the key developmental process driving human development. And because temporality, because history, because the arrow of time cuts through all levels, human development is a relatively plastic phenomenon. It's not completely plastic. We can't grow wings and fly, but we can, through our interactions with our world, invent technology that allow us to get into machines that fly. So relative plasticity becomes a defining feature of human development. And again, if we go back to neuroscience and epigenetics, we see that this is fundamental in our biological makeup. But there's a last implication of relational developmental systems theory: optimism. If development is relatively plastic, and if we can understand how individual and context combine across time, we can promote social justice. We can find combinations of individual and context that optimize the course of individual life. Will everybody be the same? No. But because of relative plasticity, we can improve the human condition wherever and however we find it. Across time and place, we can find these combinations that can create greater health and level the playing field for promoting social justice. So the PYD perspective has 6 key ideas. First, because of the potential to change, all youth have strengths. What you see is not what you get. Plasticity allows you to move towards optimization. All contexts have strengths as well. They're the resources, they're the assets, in Peter Benson's term, or the social nutrients needed to grow healthy kids. Wherever you see kids, you're going to see the potential to find these assets. Families, schools, faith institutions, youth-serving organizations, community more generally. And here is the key, number 5 is the key hypothesis of the PYD perspective. If the strengths of young people are combined with the ecological developmental assets that exist in their settings, then healthy, positive development can be promoted. And again, we should be optimistic that it's in our power to find those combinations of individual and context that can put kids on a more positive path. It's in our power to be able to identify what we can do to grow the assets in communities to strengthen kids. So this is a very strength-based and optimistic approach. There are numerous models of this, and I'm going to give you a very quick overview because I only have 29 minutes left. I'm going to give you a very quick overview of the different models. One of the most influential and persuasive models is the one by Bill Damon, who studied purpose. Purpose is not getting to the mall and getting the latest jeans. Purpose is something beyond the self. A young person seeks to accomplish something beyond the self, and it includes plans for future action, meaningfulness to self and other people, and it becomes part of, the purpose becomes part of one's identity, and it organizes the person's interactions with their world. And you can see this in not only what they say, but in what they do. It's a very action-oriented. Remember, in relational developmental systems, it's the integration of actions that's important. The late Peter Benson, who was head of Search Institute. By the way, if anybody wants these slides, just give me your card after the talk, and I'll be happy to send them to you, so you don't have to take pictures. You can take pictures, but I'll be happy to send them to you. So what Peter's work was to identify the individual strengths, the individual assets that could be aligned with ecological assets to put people on what he called the thriving journey. Jackie Eccles, expectancy value models of achievement-related behaviors. So activity choice, persistence, and performance are the key influences on how people interact with their context. Again, I'm going over these very, very quickly. Reed Larson. To Reed, the key to positive development is action, initiative, goal-related behavior, purpose, again, as in Bill's terms. And he focuses in on out-of-school time activities that can engage and enhance these initiatives. And so he's particularly interested in the role of community-based programs as providing an impetus to initiative. Margaret Beal Spencer, now at the University of Chicago. She, building on Yuri Bronfenbrenner's work, has a phenomenological variant of ecological systems theory, and she's particularly concerned with how we can understand the structural factors that may enhance or inhibit the pathway to positive development for marginalized youth, kids of color, poor kids. Again, Steve Hamilton with his collaborator and wife, Mary Agnes Hamilton, they look at adolescent to adult transitions and particularly school to work transitions. They've done this both in the United States and across Europe. And they see that these positive transitions to a productive adulthood involve two sets of characteristics: transparency, being able to figure out what are the rules of person-context interaction you need to follow to be able to move forward positively in life, and permeability. You see the pathway, can you get there? Or are there societal, cultural constraints for poor kids, for women to move into particular roles? Catalano and Hawkins, University of Washington, also like Reed Larson, are interested in the role of community-based programs, and they have a long list, as you can see, of characteristics that they look at as indicative of the positive development of youth. Ann Maston, the past president of the Society for Research and Child Development, she looks at resilience as a individual context relational phenomenon consistent with the meta model that I talked about. And she looks at how relations in the family might cascade to peer relations, to engagement in schools. So she looks at cross-context and cross-psychological domain relations, and she looks at these in particularly vulnerable populations. Kids who have survived a weather calamity like a hurricane or a flood, kids who are living in war zones, street children. And what she and I are doing now, we're looking at the resilience in the children of America's military families who move around a lot and have deployed parents. And then a last model I might mention is one that my spouse and collaborator Jackie Lerner and I developed. And we look at the role of the individual strengths that kids have, like self-regulation and hope. School engagement is another strength. And look at the developmental assets that exist in the ecology of youth, how they come together to lead to the 5 C's and contribution. Now, I want to say more about and show you how one of these approaches may lead to research and application. So I picked randomly among the several theories, and my random selection led to this model. Fortunate for me, because it's the only one I really know anything about. So this is a very simplistic view of the Lerner and Lerner relational developmental systems model. When the strengths of individuals are aligned in a mutually beneficial way with ecological assets, you're going to see PYD defined by the 5 C's emerge, and 2 hypotheses. Contribution should go up, and reduce risk behavior, both internalizing and externalizing behavior, should go down. This is a more complex view. It's sort of towards our structural model that we use, and it shows how, if you can follow this, I'll see if I can point. Ecological assets are things like social networks, institutions, individuals, access to resources. We focus in our work on 3 adolescent strengths: intentional self-regulation, goal-directed behavior, executive function, strategic thinking, compensatory behaviors in the face of blocked goals, school engagement, which we see as a context-specific example of self-regulation, the emotional, cognitive, and behavioral attributes you need to engage positively with your school, and hopeful expectations for the future. You're not going to energize or enact these self-regulatory abilities if you think there's no chance I could succeed. So hope becomes an emotional energizer. We define PYD as Rick Little did, and then we look at the two outcomes. His outcome that he thought of contribution, and then the idea that, well, as this goes up, these things should go down. We've looked at things like depression, delinquency, substance abuse, bullying. This is a question mark. As you'll see when I talk about some of our research, I'm not exactly sure if this is a universal reciprocal relationship. So what have we learned about PYD to date? And I'm going to focus in on the 4-H study of positive youth development. I'll say a little bit about the design of that study and where we're getting the data from. So that's the 4-H logo. They allow me to use it. And I want to thank Don Floyd, the president of National 4-H, who invested almost $10 million in this study, as you'll hear in a moment, and the Altria Corporation, from which Don got a lot of the money to invest in me. For those of you who don't know, Altria used to be called Philip Morris. And back when he started taking money from Philip Morris, it was very controversial, but now every major youth-serving organization, Big Brothers Big Sisters, Boys and Girls Clubs, Scouting, they all get money from Altria. When government funds dried up, they went there and they were able to get the money. These are the people who are responsible for the work. I just want to point out that Jackie Lerner, Jarrett Lerner, our younger son, and so nepotism is us at my lab. I just wanted to be upfront about that. So what's the design of this study? We studied a little bit more than 7,000 kids from grade 5 starting in 2002 through grade 12. So this is a longitudinal study, and we were able to, from 42 states, you can see why it was so expensive, and we got about half of their parents, 3,500 parents. And that's where my statements at the beginning of the talk. This is not a random sample. You can't randomly get people to stay in an 8-year study. But the demographics of this sample, although it's biased towards white middle class kids, still has a good representation across the socioeconomic and racial ethnic categories. Youth were first surveyed in grade 5 and then studied longitudinally. When we got them to grade 6, we took a new sample of 6th graders, matched with the 5th graders, or the people who were 5th graders, and began studying them. When those two groups got to 7th grade, we did the same thing. We took a new sample of 7th graders, matched, followed them. And so think of an inverted triangle. The sample size gets bigger and bigger. There's planned missingness. Through multiple imputation techniques, we're able to deal with that. And we just got a small grant, just finished it last year, to take these kids 2 years after high school. We, again, not a random sample of the 7,000. We were able to get 700 of them. We had enough incentive money because these kids become very valuable. They don't want to do this for free, so most of our grant was spent on incentives. What do we measure? Well, we measure the 5 C's. We measure youth strengths as operationalized by intentional self-regulation. This is if those of you who know the work of the late German psychologist Paul Baltus, selection of positive goals, Bill's purpose, if you will, your strategies, executive functions to optimize those goals, and then the compensatory behaviors when goals are blocked or when you fail. School engagement, the psychological, cognitive, emotional, and behavioral characteristics of engaging positively in sustained ways in your school and then hope for a positive future. And ecological assets, we measured other individuals, parents, teachers, coaches, mentors, institutions like out-of-school time programs, libraries, parks, youth-adult collaborations. Notice the word collaborations, where they're actually being partners in the relationship. and then the access that young people had to these other three categories. Contribution, we looked at a construct which we called active and engaged citizenship. We either had to adapt or develop all of those measures. The only sets of measures that we didn't have to worry about developing were risk and problem behavior measures. There's a plethora of those, and we use those that were well known in the literature. I'll come back to that. So our first finding, which was published first in 2005, after all of these speculations that there's a construct called positive youth development and it's possible to measure it through these 5 C's, we actually found that there are 5 first-order latent variables that correspond to the 5 C's and that they converge on a second-order latent variable, positive youth development. What are our findings about individual strengths? Well, consistent with our model, intentional self-regulation is a key cognitive and behavioral strength. It positively predicts PYD and contribution and negatively predicts risk and problem behaviors both within grades and across grades. You could look at SOC in grades 5 and 6 and see that a kid is on a pathway that will be realized at grade 12. This is the power of longitudinal research. Hope for the future is a key emotional basis of PYD. Within and across grades again. By the way, every comparison we do, we are controlling for endogeneity and selection effects. So in the Q&A afterwards, we can talk about that. So within and across grades, hopeful future expectations are associated with higher intentional self-regulation, with PYD, contribution, and with lower risk and problem behavior scores. And again, school engagement has the same relations. Not surprisingly, there's a very high correlation between general intentional self-regulation and specific school engagement. Again, we see school engagement as a context-specific self-regulatory ability. Peter Benson thought there were 20 different ecological assets. It's really hard to find 20 independent, positively related things. We find evidence for 4 individuals in the lives of youth, such as mentors, family members, teachers, physical and institutional resources, youth engagement with people and institutions in their environment in a collaborative partnership way, and then accessibility to institutions and environments. One of the interesting findings is that whether you're talking about the home, the school, the community, other people are the most important asset. They swamp the variance associated with other assets. And that's a great potential leveler in our society. It costs a lot to build a skateboard park or to put fancy computers in an after-school program. But folks, we come cheap. If we want to be passionate, as Yuri Bronfenbrenner said, unconditionally passionate, we are the major asset in the lives of youth. And then we found, when we looked at youth programs, that there were 3 characteristics of youth programs, whether it was 4-H, Boys and Girls Clubs, Scouting, local programs, that when they were present in an integrated way, constituted a key ecological resource. And the big 3 are positive and sustained relations with a caring, committed, and competent adult. Our colleague Jean Rhodes, who studies mentoring, has shown that if you break down the, for example, mentoring relationship prior to a year, young people actually get worse than they were before you started that relationship. So 1 year seems to be a tipping point for the presence of a competent, caring, and committed young person. What happens in the context of that adult-youth relationship? Life skills are inculcated. How to get up and out in the morning, how to dress for a job interview, how to write a letter, how to prepare a resume. But critically, the life skills associated with intentional self-regulation. How to develop a purpose and manage your goals. How to optimize their chances through strategic thinking, executive function, and having the resources to not give up in the face of block goals or failure. Key life skills. And then finally, armed with those life skills and in the presence of these caring, committed adults, what you want to see as the third aspect of an effective youth development program is giving the young person an opportunity to lead, not just participate in, but to become a leader in valued family, school, and community activities. When you put those three things together, you see that out-of-school time programs, community-based programs, are an incredible asset promoting positive development. And actually, this finding occurs not just in the 4-H data sets, but in the data sets of all the colleagues that I mentioned in my overview of the different theories. So, contribution is indeed a key outcome of positive youth development, and we've defined active and engaged citizenship as our index of contribution. And we've been able, through confirmatory factor analysis, to identify civic duty as one component, civic skills as another component, feeling of connection to your community, your neighborhood, and that you actually participate. So those are the four components of active and engaged citizenship. It's predicted by ISR, HOPE, and PYD, both within and across time, and generally, as contribution goes up, risk and problem behaviors go down. But there are diverse pathways that youth travel across adolescence. Trajectories start and end at different points. So here is the four trajectories we're able to identify for PYD from grades 5 to 12. Now, I tend to look at this, I want to be very conservative here. I think this is one trajectory in which kids are elevated lower or higher. I don't really see these as I think there's one PYD trajectory, and at least we enter at 5, which is already 10 years of age, is going to put you more or less on a path through your middle school and high school years. I see the same thing for contribution, although there may be two trajectories here for contribution. I don't know, we can interpret whether there's 4 or 2, but I want to be conservative. But for risk behaviors, you can see it's a very different story. So this is substance abuse and delinquency, and in this configuration it includes bullying. And depressive symptoms. You see very different trajectories. So not only are there different individual trajectories, there are diverse combinations of positive and problematic trajectories. Despite an overall general inverse relation, there are some youth who show very different developmental pathways. There's one group of youth who, for example, are at the highest levels of PYD from grade 5 to grade 12, at the highest levels of contribution from grade 5 to grade 12, and yet this group shows a steady increase in depressive symptomatology as measured by the Radloff CESD scale, which is one of the major indices of depressive symptomatology. Do you know what we call these members of this group? Highest levels of PYD, 20 points above any other group, highest levels of contribution, 20 to 25, and yet, although it's not at the clinical range, they show from grade 5 all the way through grade 12 a steady linear increase in depressive symptomatology. Anybody guess what we call this group? Girls. It's a group that my wife and daughter tell me I know little about, but maybe during the Q&A we can hypothesize about why this happens. But high levels of ISR and high levels of ecological assets have been found to predict, especially in girls, the highest levels. If you go back to those slides that showed that there are these different levels of PYD and contribution, girls are more likely to be in that level, and ISR and HOPE predicts that. So what are some of the conclusions that we can reach so far? Well, relative plasticity exists across adolescence. We see change. Adolescent development involves multidirectionality, especially for the risk and problem behaviors. There's an equal potential to change in positive directions. In fact, kids can all end up being scoring high on contribution, that's equifinality, but also there's variation in outcomes. So you see all possible changes. Given that, you could say, well, that shows the glass is half full. I see the presence of such plasticity and such within-person change and between people differences in within-person change. I see that as a sign that we should be optimistic, that we can, if we're ingenious enough, capitalize on that plasticity. But clearly, because there's not a perfect inverse relation between PYD and between contribution and risk problem behaviors, we need both promotion and prevention strategies. I entered this field before I had data saying we can forget about prevention. All we need to do is promote. That's clearly not advisable. So what do we need to do? We need to ask, and I'll come back to this at the very last slide, we need to ask, because of this complexity, a multi-part what question. What characteristics of within-person change in relation to what contextual characteristics, what developmental assets, for example, for what youth, boys, girls, African Americans, European Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, will lead to what outcomes in terms of contribution or risk problem behaviors, through what intervention programs, through what portions of the adolescent period. That's a very complex question, but I don't think we could ask a less complex question given the multi-level changes we see linking person and context. We also can make conclusions about how we can promote positive development. School and community-based programs marked by the big three influence both PYD and civic behaviors. So again, the big three are, the center part is sustained adult-youth partnerships, skill-building activities are the bedrock, and youth leadership has to be the culminating component of these programs. And what you'll see here, if you do this across the adolescent decade, both positive development and civic contributions will occur. So what are the implications of the 4-H study and the PYD perspective more generally for enhancing youth development and their contributions? First, we need research and evaluation, program evaluation, that recognizes the complexity of person-context relations and that assesses these relations longitudinally. Built on that bedrock, we could change practice. We now have a vocabulary to give practitioners the opportunity not just to define good as the absence of bad, but to point to those characteristics, competence, confidence, character, connection, caring, and even contribution, as indicative of a thriving, flourishing young person. And in addition to our youth development programs having a prevention component, which again, I now believe we still need, we can begin having practice aimed at promotion of strengths, promotion of virtues, like character and contribution. And maybe, based on the evaluation of these different practices, we can ultimately change policy. We can have our policymakers begin to invest money not in pillars of prevention, which again I'm saying is still important, but also to put some money to empower practitioners to begin to promote the good things that we see in our young people and not give them the dispiriting message. To begin to have social policy that is aimed at recognizing that all young people can live on a more level playing field, that our democracy could be defined with a vision of social justice because of the plasticity of human development. So this brings me to my last slide. I believe that whether you use the learner approach, the Damon approach, the Benson approach, the Eccles, the Larson, we could really begin to answer the really big question, for those of you who remember Ed Sullivan, the really big question about positive youth development and civic engagement. So the top part is how I phrase this as a researcher. What actions predicated on the big three components of successful youth development programs, of what duration, with what youth, in what communities, at what point in adolescence, will result in what features of positive youth development and youth contributions to self, family, community, and civil society. But it's really a more simple question. We have it in our power. We have the theory, we have the research, we have the tools to answer a very simple but critical question for our nation. How do we use youth development programs to foster mutually beneficial relations between healthy youth and a nation marked by social justice, democracy, and liberty? Colleagues, if we could answer that question through our scholarship in the next 10 years, we will have a more civil society, a healthier nation, and flourishing youth. Thank you very much. Sure, of course.
I think we have time for one or two questions. So if you have a burning question, you can step to the mic. Go ahead and step to the mic and ask a question for the speaker.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you so much. I feel completely revitalized, and I could go on, but my question is more related toward how do we identify the strengths in our youth? Is it the same measurement that we use for adults?
No. Asking a developmentalist, do you use the same measure across the lifespan, you're going to get the same answer. No, it has to be developmentally appropriate measures. Let me make another offer, therefore. We have the institute that I work in at Tufts is called the Institute for Applied Research and Youth Development. Every project we have is aimed at developing tools for practitioners. So, for instance, we have developed a research tool to measure positive youth development. It's laborious. That's why we have to pay people to take the measure. But we have developed, and this will be coming out in the Journal of Research in Adolescence pretty soon, we've developed a short form and a very short form, 17 items, that we can send you for free, that you could use geared for kids from 10 to basically 18. You have to define a little bit differently for like 10 to 14 and 15 to 18, but we give you the instruction books how to do that for free. We have measures of the intentional self-regulation abilities. We have rubrics for mentors and for teachers. We have a playbook that practitioners can use to engage kids in using those rubrics as self-monitoring techniques. And again, it's different for early adolescence through late adolescence. So we have videos that we can give you, and we give this away. The only thing we ask is if you use it, you let us know how it's working, because we're giving you version 1.0. We want to make it better. But if any of you write me, richard.lerner@tufts.edu, I will be delighted to have this material sent to you, and please use it and tell me how it's working.
Does anybody else feel like it's Christmas?
Woohoo!
Thank you. I want some of that.
Okay.
I'm working with the founder of WikiHow, which is the second largest wiki in the world. And the bulk of their material has been written by non-researchers.
Okay.
One of our biggest challenges is that the students that aren't in these programs are going to the internet and they're asking questions like, how do I cope with depression?
Right.
And what they're getting is bad, non-research-based evidence.
Right.
Now, when we're having conversations here, we use a lot of big words.
Yes, of course.
This is inaccessible to kids that are still in school. And what I'm looking for from your material and from anybody else who wants to contribute, the founder of WikiHow is looking for research-based interventions that kids can do for themselves. If you think of do-it-yourself CBT.
So we have that, not as much as you want, and it's not for kids all over the world. One of the problems we have is people from Portugal, from Ecuador are trying to take our tools and just use them. You can't do that. But for kids across the breadth of the country, and again, we're in 42 states, so the measures we have are built on that. We can give you tools that'll be a start. We'd be delighted to do that. Write me, and we'll get them to you. And anything we could do to help, we will. That's our
Great.
raison d'etre. So,
All right, thank you.
okay.
We'll take,
One more, maybe?
we'll take two more questions, one here and one here.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. It's a really great lecture. And I want to ask about, because I saw, from the fifth grade until 15th grade. But how can this be applied for college students? Because college students, they are kind of grown up and they have their own certain values have already rooted in their mind. And can that be changed? And based on this kind of strength focus and positive focus something.
That's a wonderful, wonderful question. So, should I answer or? Okay, so let me answer. Okay. So I think it's a great question. As I mentioned, we have a small follow-up 2 years post high school, and the majority of the kids in the 700 kids we were able to get, we got about 10% of the 4-H sample, are in college. We're just analyzing those data now. So 2 points. One, you need to base this on research. There's a paucity of good developmental research on the third decade of life, both in this country and internationally. I participated in one conference last year to try to improve the measurement models in the third decade of life. There's another conference coming up in Hanover, Germany, actually on these dates, same dates, but next year. The question you asked is of great concern. We don't know how this plays out empirically, but studies are beginning to look at that. I have several other studies at the Institute in which we are studying right now positive development in vocational schools. I just launched the study with, I don't know if Bill Damon and Ann Colby are in the room, but with Bill Damon and Ann Colby, where we're looking at positive development in a relatively small college in upstate New York. It's a specialized college. It's called West Point. And we're looking at positive development among the cadets at West Point and its relationship to their leadership. So we're beginning to investigate this, but we need more work so that we can talk on the basis of facts and not make statements on conjecture. But it has to be developmentally appropriate, and that's why we're extending the research to young adulthood. Last question?
Thank you very much.
Hello. I'm sorry.
Oh, there. I'm sorry.
My name is Vanessa Madrazo. I was involved in a program out of Florida International University under William Cortinez, and we would do community-based interventions at alternative high schools. It's called the Changing Lives program. But it turned out that those alternative high schools in Miami-Dade were all closed.
Oh my
all
God.
of them.
You know, the monograph he wrote, I wrote the forward to
Yes,
in the Journal of
JAR.
Adolescent Research, right.
So how would you suggest that when we see these kind of things that are really sending another message to youth that they probably are most in need of a positive developmental intervention, and then something happens like this where because of budgets or whatever, the alternative schools are closed. How do we go about addressing these things that happen in the greater society in terms of drawing more attention to the fact that things such as alternative schools and programs are needed?
I don't mean to make light of your question. You know, I know Bill Cortinez very well. You know I'm a great admirer of his work. In fact, in a chapter that Jackie Lerner and I wrote about the positive youth development perspective, where we talked about all 3 parts, and we talked about exemplary programs. We use your program as one of the great examples of a PYD program. Unfortunately, the only solution that will work is called voting. We need to put in place politicians who understand the need to invest in children. I don't know what else to say.
Hi. We are working in Venezuela with a project with UNICEF and Universidad Metropolitana called Positive Promotion of Adolescents. And we all the time are worried about prevention or promotion, and we want to be at the middle, okay? But all the last projects are about prevention, and we are working with promotion, but UNICEF in their guidelines says that we have to take both.
Yes.
Prevention, and how do you do it to the people understand that is important to prevention and is more important to promotion the positive
So, depending on who is in charge, if they're interested in data, if they're interested in good science, you present not just my research, but the research of Jackie Eccles and Reed Larson and Bill Damon. There's a plethora of data that show that you need both, and they need to be integrated in a cohesive way. It's difficult. You can't be a prophet in your own country. So I read that somewhere. So it may be that you need to bring in consultants to a quick story. I was Tufts is in Medford. The town right next to it is Cambridge, and one of my good colleagues, Tony Earls, who's a well-known psychiatrist, was a member of the youth council in Cambridge. The youth council in Cambridge had no youth members to it. And Tony, who's this world-renowned psychiatrist at Harvard, would say, well, you need youth. And they said, no, what do you know? He called me in from 3 miles away as the consultant, and I said, well, of course you need youth. I talked about the big three. So then they put youth on the youth council.
Okay.
So you need to bring in consultants who will explain why your perspective is critical to enact.
Okay, thank you. We continue working, okay?
Thank
Bye.
you. So, thank you again, folks.